Welcome, fellow veterans. From the tip of the spear to in the rear with the gear. I went from active duty infantry to reserve component logistician. I'm your host, CEO, entrepreneur, trial lawyer, and Lieutenant Colonel retired John Barry. The military lessons that I learned helped me grow an 8-figure business that has maintained consistent annual double-digit growth, landing on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing companies in America every year for the past 7 years, and has allowed me to continue to serve America's heroes. Welcome to Veteran Led. I'm joined today with Senator and Colonel retired Tom Brewer. I want to tell you a little bit about his past, give you a brief bio. This is not all inclusive, but these are some of the highlights. Colonel Brewer served as both an infantry officer and an attack helicopter pilot. He retired as a colonel in the reserve component after 36 years of total service, including 2 tours in Kyrgyzstan and 6 in Afghanistan. He was shot 6 times in 2003 and blown up by an RPG in 2011. He's a recipient of 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and the Secretary of Defense Medal of Freedom, as well as the Combat Infantryman's Badge, the Ranger Tab, and several other awards. His combat experience in Afghanistan is documented in a book called The Boneyard, written by James Christ. Colonel Brewer led a response team following Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. His team rescued more than 600 civilians. Brewer was elected in 2016 and was the first Native American to serve the Nebraska legislature and was re-elected in 2020. Senator Brewer led a contingent of state lawmakers to climb Mount Kilimanjaro and conducted 5 humanitarian missions to the Ukraine, 3 before the war started and 2 afterwards. Recently, Senator Brewer received the Chief Standing Bear Prize for Courage, which was October of 2023, and his children and relatives serve in the military today. I'm honored to have you here, Colonel Brewer, and before we get started, I want to tell you a story I heard from someone who knows you well. And I was asking him about your leadership, and he said, there are 3 types of officers. There are the officers who only care about their careers. They are the careerists. These are the Blue Falcons. Then there are those who will do what's right for their soldiers, but they would rather beg forgiveness than ask permission. And then there is Tom Brewer, who puts the team first, puts people first, puts the mission always, and exercises an unapologetic belligerence when it comes to taking care of his men. I'm honored to have you here. Thanks so much for being on the show, Colonel Brewer.
John, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
So I want to start at the beginning. And you grew up on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and became quite a marksman. Tell us what growing up was like.
Well, it's kind of a survival drill. Of course, when your father's an airborne ranger, you are required to learn to double time, not run. You have to learn survival skills because if you don't survive. He stressed to us the need to not miss because we were poor and ammunition was at a premium. And then, of course, you learned how to skin animals and find ways of making money, whether you were crushing aluminum cans or tanning hides. So, it was probably a good experience for someone who was going to grow up and be in the military.
Now, I heard a story when you came back from Afghanistan in 2003, and this is, of course, the Boneyard was written about your experience, but I heard you give a speech and you spoke specifically about the basic soldiering skills. And you said, I learned to be a good marksman and that saved my life. And the basic soldiering skills that we learn can save our lives. And you just kept going back to the basics. And I really, this is why I wanted you to be on the show so bad, because at Veteran Led, I believe that veterans know the basics to be successful. And you've embodied that, not just in your military career, but your post-military political career, your humanitarian career. And so I'm really excited to talk about that. So you grew up on the reservation, you learned some skills. Your father's an airborne ranger, so I take it by the time you were 18, you didn't even have a choice.
I would say that if there was anybody who ever walked the earth that didn't have much of a choice about what he was going to do, it would be me, because my father was very blunt in saying, I don't have the money to send you to college. The only thing I can do to prepare you for life is to be there and sign the paperwork and make sure that you are airborne and Ranger qualified. After you do that, your life is yours. But I believe that will give you a path ahead. And so that may be a harsh life for some But I think for me, it really did a great job of setting a course ahead. The stressing of marksmanship become a factor later in life, because as I became a better shooter in the military, I was invited to try out for the 96 Olympics, went to Atlanta on the U.S. Olympic team on the military side, and was an alternate, not a primary, but it instilled this understanding of the importance of it. I had a chance to meet with Gary Anderson, and if you're not familiar with Gary, he's a two-time Olympic champion from Nebraska, a little town of Axtell. And he was running the Olympics at Wolf Creek there. And he took me under his wing and coached and mentored me and stressed marksmanship and taught fundamentals I had never heard. And then I used them to build teams for Nebraska, because when I became the marksmanship coordinator in Nebraska, we were 49th out of 50 states. And
49th being almost the worst.
One away from the worst. Within 2 years, we were national champions. And then, this was in the 90s when the football team was winning and we were winning, and it was kind of a nice place to be. And it ultimately led to me being selected as the director of marksmanship at Little Rock and training the whole nation in marksmanship. So, it's funny how small things like just being able to shoot accurately to survive became this passion and skill that helps you through life.
And actually, you just told me we're sucking down a lot of coffee today, because where were you yesterday?
Shooting a long-range competition in Missouri.
Okay. And you got to be, about 65 years old, and you're still competing?
Actually, I won the world championship 3 years ago at 62. So I'm slowing down. I'll freely admit that. But sometimes with shooting, it's about understanding winds. It's understanding about conditions. And sometimes being old works to your advantage, not your disadvantage.
Now, speaking of that in shooting, understanding that, the infantryman is the rifleman, how did you transition, or why, to becoming an attack helicopter pilot?
Well, I wish I had some great story about how I was, a genius and was able to do great on the FAST test, the flight aptitude test. But what happened was in the early 80s, the Army was hurting for helicopter pilots. And so they came to a number of us, and back then there was no allowance for poor eyesight. You either were a 20/20 or you didn't get to fly. Well, I was blessed to have 20/20 vision. And back then, you kept your branch originally. There was no aviation branch. So they said, why don't you transition, become a helicopter pilot? You can still keep your branch as infantry. And I said, well, okay. And so I was in a room, and they said, what would you like to fly? Well, the options were the Chinook, which was the flying school bus, didn't want that. The Huey, which was the small bus, and then the Cobra. And so the Cobra gave you a 20-millimeter cannon, 2.75 rockets, and tow missiles. Not a hard decision, plus it flew faster than the rest of them. So I became a Cobra pilot. I truly enjoyed it. But what happens in aviation is your true pilots are the warrant officers. They're the ones that do the majority of the flying. And as a commissioned officer, as you work up to staff assignments, you either fly a lot and are good, or you don't fly that much and you're dangerous. And I did not want to be the cause of my death. I wanted to have a fair shot at surviving this military career. And I could see how my skill sets not only endangered me, but the other person if I didn't get enough flight time. And that was just becoming physically impossible. So I made the decision, to leave aviation and go back to just regular staff assignments and duties as you normally have, because I felt that at that point I really had served my value in the aviation community.
And that is how you ended up with a combat infantryman's badge, even though you went from infantry and aviation back to infantry. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that. Right here, I have the book, The Boneyard, written by James F. Christ. This is the book about your experience. I like the book for several reasons. I like the way it starts and ends with this general officer telling you that you don't need any more firepower than your 9mm. Now, let me tell you about a mistake I made, and I talked about it in an earlier podcast. 2005, I was in Iraq. It was Christmas. Presents were coming in. I had soldiers across many FOBs. I'm sure you know the experience, and you want to check in on your team, deliver the presents, make sure the holiday is going well, because depression and those things can set in. And I got a sergeant major to come with me, and we just hopped on a Chinook and flew out to this FOB, and we just assumed, okay, we'll get a flight out of here, right? No problem. And when the next stop was Fallujah, well, we stop at the FOB with the presents with our 9mm because we didn't want to carry a lot. We had to carry presents. Well, of course, there was no flight out, and we had to take a convoy to Fallujah. And the Marine lieutenant who I hitched a ride with is like, "Where are your weapons?" And I showed him the 9mm pistols, and he laughed and handed us some AK-47s, and we got through Fallujah. But my point is, you showed up and then you said, "Sir, we need weapons. We're in Afghanistan. We're training ANA, the Afghan National Army, and you're the embedded training team. And so you're out training with the Afghans during the day, traveling back to your base at night in this book, 0100, and they're telling you don't need weapons." And so you obviously put up a fight and get the weapons, and then the Boneyard happens. So please, tell us about the Boneyard. I've read the story, I've heard your speech, but in your own words, the audience, I think, will love to hear your version of what happened.
Well, you did a great setup. So here we are. It is early in the war. We are training the very first Kandaks, the battalions of the Afghan National Army. And we're struggling because some of the folks that have been put in charge were plucked out of the Pentagon and were absolutely clueless about what we really needed. So we worked through that, and we were able to do that partially because of a lot of the captured weapons from caves and stops along the way that we had of vehicles that had them as smuggled items that they were trying to bring in. And the problem was, if we were out doing operations and they caught us as U.S. Carrying AK-47s, we had a couple of generals in particular that just really become unpleasant. And it was so ridiculous because if we were in a fight, the ammunition that our troops were carrying, the Afghans, then was interchangeable. They were reliable weapons, and with a little bit of training, they're fairly accurate for the ranges that we dealt with. And so as time went on and I got more and more discouraged, I said, okay, fine. So we literally ordered all the parts to build an AR-15 and then modified them once we were in the country and built weapons over there to issue. Now, they weren't weapons that were seal numbered anywhere on the books. That may sound like a ridiculous way of doing it, but it turned out that on the evening of 12 October 2003, as we were returning from the Pakistani border after doing ops with a Kandak. So imagine this, we train a Kandak up, one of the Afghan battalions. We take them out and they engage the Taliban. And what we did is through that process started to judge leadership. Who was a natural that understood how to lead men under fire and who didn't? Because some of the early processes there, they simply did it by tribal affiliation. And that didn't correlate to any leadership skills, especially in combat.
Like you're born an officer, you're born a leader was how the Afghans looked at it.
Or you knew somebody who was appointing someone to a position and just because of who you know, not what you know. So we changed that. We said, no, that's not how this is going to work. So we'd had a good day, and we had figured out some NCO positions, and things were really working nice. And it was a beautiful evening, actually. We're coming back, and we went through this place called the Boneyard. So the Boneyard, envision this. Hundreds of destroyed Soviet tanks and armored personnel carriers are in this area. It's relatively small. And I think what happened is after several battles, they drugged these in. So there was just kind of a congregation of these.
A junkyard of tanks.
Junkyards, that's it. That's a good way to look at it. Well, the Afghans were kind of superstitious about the place because there were still skeletons in some of these. So they didn't really go anywhere near it.
And when you say skeletons, you mean human remains, not skeletons of vehicles. Yes, so human remains still in the old Russian vehicles.
Right. So the Afghans didn't want to go there. So what did the Americans do? We built a road through the middle of it. Well, evidently the Taliban weren't as concerned about skeletons in these vehicles because they set up to launch into the city of Kabul, which wasn't far from the Boneyard, some of these Katyusha rockets. And they were setting those up to fire them in the middle of the night as we just happened through there. And they didn't expect anyone to be coming through. They engaged us. There was only 6 of us, 2 vehicles. And when they did, my thought process at the time is, okay, there's 2, because that's all we saw one time, a guy with an RPG and a guy with an AK. So it seemed like good odds, 6 of us, 2 of them. And I thought, if we don't deal with this, the next convoy to come through may not have the luck of being missed by that first shot. So we're going to close with and destroy the enemy. That's kind of what we got paid to do over there.
That's the number one job skill of the infantry, to close with and destroy the enemy.
So we actually pulled in behind a destroyed T-55 tank. I broke us into 2 teams, an A team and a B team. We moved forward. I said, listen, I will move to the flank where there is a wadi that lets them escape to the Jalalabad Road and cut that off. You guys stay here. It's open desert behind them. We'll call the QRF. We'll hold them in place till they get there. Then we'll close with. They'll either give up or pay the consequences.
Now, at that time, the QRF, the Quick Reaction Force, is 10th Mountain Division.
It is the 10th Mountain Division.
Okay.
And just as a passing note, the commander of the regiment that was there of the 10th Mountain Division was a guy named Mark Milley, who just retired as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. His boss and the guy who signed both my Purple Hearts was a guy by the name of Lloyd Austin, who is currently the Secretary of Defense. So on the night of the Boneyard, the 2 in the sequence of the chain of command ended up sticking around for a while. And so anyway, that's just kind of a trivia. But neither of them was the one who had made the decision to not allow us have the weapons. That was a 1-star. And again, he worked at Siege of Soda and just was kind of a pain in everyone's side because he just did not understand how to train soldiers or fight wars. But that's okay. The Army has a bad habit of putting people like that in leadership positions.
He was a bureaucrat, and bureaucrats absolutely hate heroism.
Oh.
And so...
Or do they ever? And,
one of the things on the Veteran-Led podcast is we take away a lot of the great things we learn from the military, but we also learn from the stupid stuff. And as you said, the Afghans had AK-47s. They had 7.62 rounds, and had one of them been shot in because you're training in the compounds, in open areas where you are subject to enemy fire that can happen. And this general is telling you, you don't need more than a 9mm. And you understand there's snipers out there. There's RPGs. There are people who want to kill you. There are people who are not happy you are training their adversary. And so you're doing everything you can. And this general officer saying, well, we really don't think that you need that weapon, that protection. But even the stupidity around the AK-47s, I'm like, if you just think about simplicity, right? If you run a business, you understand that you have to, recycle things. You have to reuse things. And if something happens to your weapon system or something happens to an Afghan soldier and you're under attack, there are going to be AK-47s on the ground, and there's going to be 7.62 magazines full, and the fact that you aren't allowed to carry one is just complete and sheer stupidity. So anyway, I can only imagine your frustration. And look, everybody that served this, listening to this, knows the level of stupidity. We've all seen big Army stupidity, but here it is, the 1-star, the bureaucrat who's off somewhere safe, telling you on the ground, Colonel Brewer, I don't think you should have weapons. I think you're safe. And that's the one of these, why don't you come down here with your 9mm and help me, right?
Well, and probably the thing that struck me as is the most challenging of the after-action part of this was they were going to give me a letter of reprimand because I had failed to properly prepare my men for this engagement, that they were without the proper weapons. So I told them, I said, no, that's not true. I tried to, and I was denied this. And I attached the letter, fortunately, that I had gotten back from them denying it. And for some reason, the letter of reprimand went away, and they went to the Bronze Star instead. But the point being that night, we were limited in our resources because what happened was the QRF had gone to Bagram to pick up supplies. And, of course, there's always a backup to a QRF, and the backup was the Germans. So when we got the information they weren't available, we go to the backup, the Germans, and the Germans are like, listen, love to help you, but we need permission from our Minister of Defense in Germany. Well, this is in the middle of the night, and the minister's not available, so they couldn't come. So we had to internally build a QRF from soldiers near the Pakistani border, past a place called Polaturki, and internally they came to the rescue. So it was ourselves building this QRF. But again, they weren't equipped as well as they should have been because of the rules. But they did bring AK-47s, and that was part of what they used to suppress the enemy until the real QRF could get there, and we were able to make this work out to our advantage. But, you know, sometimes you get frustrated because the obvious right answer isn't the answer that the leadership, allows you to execute. And that's where people get killed and things happen. And I always thought that, if I was ever to be in a position of authority where I could make sure those kind of things didn't happen, that was one of my goals of my career. So, going back and forth to Afghanistan on all those tours, I was always very careful to make sure, that the men always had what they needed, especially body armor and weapons. And beyond that, you're a little bit at the mercy of the government and what's available. But it was something that I just kept going back to. And as, time went on and I was able to go to other places like the Ukraine, it was valuable in coaching and mentoring other leaders.
And that's an important lesson. I think as a leader, sometimes we want to set rules and we don't always think through how those rules, the secondary and tertiary effects affect our teams. So I took you out of the fight. Sorry for the detour, but there's a lot of leadership lessons that I wanted to pull out. All right. So now at this point, you've decided to close with and destroy the enemy. There's you see two enemy combatants. You know that if you don't take them out, they're going to be back. You think there's two. That's what you saw two at the time. And so you've decided that, okay, this is something that we need to take care of. Otherwise, other soldiers, other Marines, other individuals in Afghanistan could be harmed. And they know we're coming through this road. If they try to ambush us, they're going to try to ambush someone else. So you engage, you try to get a hold of QRF. There's no QRF. You divide your team into the Alpha team and Bravo team, and you start to maneuver around. Now what happens?
Well, it was my plan, so I thought it was a good plan. But as it developed, there were some glitches there. So the Alpha team, they laid down a base of fire. I moved to the flank along a wall, a short wall, about as tall as this table. And I told the other two, I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to jump over this wall. We're going to move about 100 yards to a large pile of concrete. I said, we're going to get behind the concrete. That will cut off their exit route. And we'll just simply hold them at bay until we could get the QRF. What I didn't realize, first off, understand it was not all my team members. We had several from the Pentagon that were there to evaluate the training. And those were the two I got. And as I jumped over the wall and took off, the guy next to me, his vest hooked on some rebar that was sticking out. And so when he went to go, he couldn't go. Well, because he didn't go, the other guy didn't go. So what happened is it was a solo sprint, and I was a distance runner in college, but become somewhat of a sprinter because it just was a few dashes into this that they opened up from the building, and that was what the realization was, that there wasn't two, there was a much larger number there. I think in the end we counted 70 plus that it either killed, wounded, or captured. So we misjudged that a little bit. But when I got to this giant pile of concrete, then I was there by myself. So the situation was I couldn't get back without probably being in a lot of risk. I still needed the mission of keeping them from escaping. Didn't realize the QRF was going to be delayed. So it seemed like that mission was simply a relatively short one. The distance from Camp Phoenix to where we were was a matter of maybe 15 to 20 minutes. So I said, I'll lay down the base of fire. We'll just continue the mission as planned. And, we drive on. And the firefight started and it continued. And this went on for about 15 minutes. It was during that period that they came back and said, oh, the QRF isn't there, but we're going to the backup. Well, the enemy started figuring out that we might want to get out of here. This could turn bad for us. And so they started in bunches of 5 or 6 rushing toward my position or toward this wadi, this opening there was in the hillside there. And so I was engaging them. That's going back to your original point. The beauty of this was I didn't have night vision, but I had a Trijicon sight that had the illuminated V or chevron, and it was very effective. As they stepped out and the silhouette came visible, just shoot center of mass, and they'd drop, and you'd work on to the next one. And so there wasn't any issue there, except that at about the 30-minute spot, I noticed that I had shot up 2 magazines. Now, I had 6, so I had more to go. But when they came back and said that the Germans weren't going to be available, I started thinking this through, that this could be a long evening, and I probably needed to pace myself a little bit on the shooting. Now, I also had a 9mm, and I always carried more ammunition than I needed to, and some people made fun of me before, not after. So I thought, well, we'll still be fine. But what they did then is started running larger groups, and it was during that I was shot the first time, and it actually hit the concrete and then ricocheted and came right along my brow line and opened up the side of my head. And I'm trying to self-treat with what's called quick clot. Now, quick clot back then looked like broken eggshells, and when you put it on, it instantly burned, and it almost sizzled like it was. It was early before they really defined it as well as it is now, and so I was a little shocked at my, the effect it had, and I was a little bit of a distraction in the middle of some pretty busy work. But it turned into kind of like a jello on your skin and stopped the bleeding. That's all good. The problem was, as they rushed the next time, a guy was able to get essentially from me to you away and stitched me with an AK at not point blank range, but near point blank range. 2 of them went into the vest. 1 went into my left lung. I was able to successfully engage him back, and he didn't have body armor, so that's a win. The problem is a bullet hitting a SAPI plate at close range, it doesn't penetrate the plate, but it takes and it pushes through fairly deep and then flexes back and breaks ribs. So now you have multiple broken ribs and a punctured lung. Your side of your head opened up, and you're still in the middle of this fight that you probably want to continue, or else this isn't going to work out real well for you. And so I had to regroup and call back and say, all right, here's the situation. We need to figure out how to solve this quickly, or this is going to be over. And that's when my internal QRF came.
Now, you hadn't told anybody you'd been shot at that point.
I didn't think it was necessary. I was worried that at this point, none of my guys had been wounded. And I didn't want them, because I knew some of them, as loyal as they were, they would have jumped over the wall and come running over to help, and would probably resulted in them not surviving. And I didn't want to be the cause of someone's death because of my injuries. It was more important that we just continue the fight. And
now let me ask you a question, though, because I read this in the book that when you were initially engaging the enemy and they were coming out of everywhere, it was like shooting coyotes on the reservation, just real easy. It's natural for you. Now we know that breathing is very important to marksmanship. Now you've got broken ribs. You're having trouble breathing. How does that change the dynamic now of the firefight?
Well, your vision narrows as you have less oxygen and less blood, and it made everything more challenging. The problem was the rate that they were coming at me was exceeding my ability to engage and reload and engage. Now, they were stacking up, a number of folks there, but they had few options. They seen the base of fire coming from the forward position. They couldn't go that way. They couldn't go out into the desert. So I was it. And so on the next wave that came, I was shot in the chest again, only it was with a PKM, which is their kind of equivalent of our 240 or M60. That was a violent event because it literally picked me up, threw me back. I landed on the back of my head. It was only at that point that I realized that when I was setting in the vehicle, moving at night, I had a map out. I was making some notes on the day, and I had taken off my helmet, set on the floorboard. And when it all happened, I never picked it up. So the first I realized I didn't have my helmet on was when my head impacted the concrete behind me. That was a wake-up call. And when I focused, I was surrounded by enemy. It had blown the radio out of my hand, and so they were engaging, shooting into the ground where the radio was, thinking that's where I was. Well, unfortunately, it had blown about 10 feet away from me, but it had also blown the rifle out of my hand when I was hit. But your pistol was strapped to your leg, so I just reached down, pulled it up, and engaged only two of them that were near me. But what happened in the melee, they turned and literally shot each other, which is fine with me. I was good to go with this. And then actually, as they were laying there, policed up some of their AKs, because I could see that at the rate of fire that I was doing, I was down, I think, 2 magazines left, and I'll take an AK over nothing. And so the fight continued. It was back and forth. And the only thing that became an issue is I fired the last of my M16 rounds. I transitioned to the AK, and I did not tell my men that. Well, at night, there's a very distinct signature of the AK, because it kicks out this barrel, a ball of fire that is unique compared to the M16. And when I did that, my guys thought that the enemy was there. So now I started taking fire from my guys, which was much more accurate fire than from the enemy. So I had to call over, and I said, listen, I'm going to break a chem light, and I'm going to drop this. If it's behind the chem light, don't shoot it. And so that's how we continued the fight for a while. The QRF, internal QRF, arrived. They did a great job of engaging the enemy, holding things, and buying us time. But there was a point where I had been shot through the left arm, shot through the lung, had a chunk of my head gone, and decided that I may want to get out of there because I was running out of blood and bullets and bright ideas, kind of all at the same time. So I said, listen, I got more firepower now. You guys pour fire into that building. You buy me time, and I'm coming back to you. Again, did not want them to come to me. That would be what they would want to do, but the chances of them surviving that were very thin. And at that point, I'd already been shot up, so it wasn't like it was that big a deal for me to get any more shot up, at least I thought. So in my sprint, after I gave him the go, I had gone about 50 yards and was shot through my right calf. Well, if you've never been shot through your calf, what it does is basically take your leg and it throws it, in this case, into your other leg, and then you go face down, kind of like you're sliding into home plate. And it takes a lot of the fight out of you because you're already in less than great shape. And as I started to get my eyes to focus, because just like in Iraq, in Afghanistan, there's this powdery dust. It's like talcum powder. So it's in your eyes. You're trying to focus. And when you focus, there's a gun barrel literally at your temple. And this dark figure is standing there, and I still had my 9mm solid rounds left. That was it. That's all I had left was that. And as I went to engage him, I realized that it was locked to the rear, that I was running and engaging them and had shot the last round. Well, fortunately, it was empty because the guy who was standing there did not know he was coming. It was a Gurkha soldier, Cogman Limbo. And Cogman had jumped on one of the vehicles coming from the border to help. And he wasn't on the same radio frequency as everyone else was. So he didn't get to stay here and let the colonel come to us. He jumped the wall and came. Now, this is a little guy.
And the Gurkhas are British, part of the coalition.
Yes, they come from Nepal. They are some of the finest soldiers I've ever seen in my life. They're very dedicated. In Cogman's case, he didn't speak a lot of English because I remember hearing him say, boss, boss, boss. Well, that's what they didn't distinguish lieutenant, captain, colonel. It was just boss. And it was a great sound to hear because I knew that it wasn't the Taliban. And the Taliban wore a dark outfit like that. And what the British did is they treat the Gurkhas as, lesser than a British soldier. And so they got desert camouflage. The Gurkhas didn't. They had the green. And so that's at night. He appeared very dark. He dropped to one knee. So he weighs 135 pounds, 40 pounds. And he picked me up. So at that time, with all my IBA and all my stuff on, probably 275 to 300, somewhere in there.
And you're about 6'3"?
Yep. And he threw me over his shoulder, and ran with me, chucked me over this short wall, jumped over the wall, and immediately started triage from head to toe. and he is doing it as professional as any medical person would. And he's putting a tourniquet on the arm, went back, did some work on the head and bandaged it. I mean, he's doing it upright, and put a seal on the lung. The fact that he had the equipment, the fact that he knew how to use the equipment, was a great tribute to the British Army and to the Gurkhas themselves. And again, he wasn't on the frequency, and it was only when I was laying there, they thought I was still somewhere out in the middle there, that I was able to get on the frequency and say, listen, I'm good. I'm going to cross the wall. Let's just hold them. And then the QRF arrived, and we went on from there. But Cogman Limbo, I put him in for the Silver Star. It was downgraded to I think a Bronze Star with V. But in the British Army, they had put him in for the George's Cross. And I was notified about a year later that they had invited me to England to come, that the Queen would present the George's Cross, and went over. Cogman's father, who was a silversmith, had made me a kukri knife, and it is silver inlaid. It was beautiful. And I told him, I said, listen, your son saved my life. I should not be taking this gift. I should be giving you one. He goes, no. He said, I'm so honored my son had a chance to serve with you, and this is my way of thanking you. And I felt small because of this, but at the ceremony, they announced that the last George's Cross to be presented to a Gurkha soldier was for operations in Indonesia in the 60s, and they brought him up to introduce him, and it was Cogman's father.
Wow.
Talk about running in the family. And Cogman went on to go to Sandhurst, became an officer, which was unheard of. Gurkhas could be NCOs, but not officers. And when I was back in Afghanistan in 2010, I went down to the Helmand province and I visited him. He was a captain, infantry company commander then, of a Gurkha company. And he was the first Gurkha to command a Gurkha company. And I thought, you know what? Sometimes karma works in the positive way. And in his case, it did. And I was just so glad that things worked out for him, because he was brave, he was a soldier true, and so it was really an amazing thing to see what had been a limited future for a Gurkha soldier change because of his actions.
And so we see a parallel here, because you were the first Native American elected to the Nebraska state legislature. So obviously a pioneer yourself, and we'll get into that later. But I don't want to disrupt the Boneyard, because it's such an important story. So you've been saved by Cogman. At this point, at some point the QRF arrives and you're relieved of command.
Well, I was. It wasn't easy though. We crawled along this wall back to where one of the vehicles were that had a base radio in it. And so I got in there. And so what I'm now is orchestrating the QRFs. Because of cloud cover, we couldn't use air support, but we did have some problems where the German QRF finally got permission to come. The 10th Mountain QRF was coming, and they coming from the opposite directions, and there was some confusion, and the American QRF actually engaged the German QRF, and so it wasn't bad enough. We were getting shot at from the Taliban. We're also getting it from both our QRFs. So we had to make sure and deconflict some of that. But it all worked out in the end. They were able to surround the place. They captured, what was left. There was a handful that did escape. But, all in all, considering how that could have turned out, it turned out pretty well.
And then you eventually got medical treatment and had an interesting ride back in the field ambulance.
Well, yes. So they finally came over and pulled me out and said, listen, you need to go get medical attention. You need to get off the radio because we don't want you to bleed to death. And I said, well, probably a fair enough assessment there. So went over to the ambulance. They had me stretched out in there, and it was the old Humvee cracker box ambulance, just a square box on the back. And they had cut off my pant leg and one sleeve, and they were doing treatment. They'd taken the tourniquet off, and All of a sudden, a couple of bullets ripped through the ambulance high above us, and the two medics exited the ambulance and left the back doors open. And the firefight was still ongoing, and I thought, well, this kind of sucks. So I evacuated myself out of the back of the ambulance, went over, hid behind a destroyed tank with the others, and I told them, I said, listen, guys, when you leave, you need to take me with you. And they go, well, we never been under fire before. And I said, all right, well, just put that down in your AAR that's not something you do, is leave the patient when you have to leave. So we come back. Well, these are two Spec 4s, scared to death. First human being, I think, actually live human being they ever worked on. So they're trying to put an IV in, and they're not having a lot of luck. And part of it was I was probably a little dehydrated. I'd lost blood. You know, if your body has enough happen to it, it is harder to find a vein. So after about the fourth time they stuck me, I said, listen, guys, I'm running low on blood as it is. You need to hit a vein. Well, I was joking, but they didn't, they're working on a lieutenant colonel, and they're scared to death, and I only made it worse. And he goes, well, do you care if we put it into your carotid artery in your neck? And I said, yeah, actually, I'd prefer you not do that one. Well, as you'll see in a second why that was. So they finally got a vein. They put it in. The IV is in. And they said, listen, we're going to get you to the German hospital. It's the closest hospital, and we got to get out of here. I'm like, I'm good with that. So they close the back doors. There's a partition, a small door between the front and the back. And they had dropped the windows, because this was not an Up Armor Humvee. This was old school stuff. And the passenger medic has his rifle out the window. He's not shooting, but he's ready to if we need be. Because what we didn't know is how many others were in the general vicinity. So in the process of them going down through the ditch and jumping back up on the road to head for the German hospital, the stretcher I'm on, they secured me to the stretcher. Did a great job there. The problem is they didn't secure the stretcher to the deck. So as they did that, it flipped the stretcher over and I landed face first on the floor, which wouldn't have been all bad, except in the process, it pulled the IV tube out, but not the needle. They taped it on. And so now you have the needle in your vein with nothing to stop the blood from just being pumped straight out, because it was a pipeline out. And the longer we went and the more I bounced, I was trying to get their attention. But it's hard when your face is against the bottom of a vehicle to yell very loud, especially when the vehicle's bouncing and you're getting mashed every time that happens. And so when we got to the German hospital and they opened the back of it, I remember them saying, holy cow, turn him over quick before someone sees him. Well, I was like, hey, guys, I'm still alive here. So they rolled me over, they put the IV back in, and then they went to try and find the Germans. For some reason, no one bothered calling the hospital saying, hey, we got somebody inbound. Well, they unstrapped me when they redid the IV, and I'm sitting on the tailgate of this Humvee waiting, and I remember needing to use a bathroom, and there was a porta potty right there, so I hobbled over there because, again, I'd been shot through the leg, and of course, no more than got the door closed, and I hear a whole bunch of German voices. Well, the Germans showed up, and they can't find me. Ambulance, and then the two kids that were there, the medics, they didn't know I went either, so there was a big to-do. Well, I figured at that point I was in trouble anyway, so it didn't matter. So took care of business, got back. Well, they take me in, they do all the triage, cleaned, and most of everything the bullet traveled through. So it was more just kind of cleaning, dressing the wounds, some stitching or stapling. And I looked a little like Frankenstein between the head and the arm and everything else. But all in all, I'd come out of it pretty good. No major things other than the lung, which they thought would heal fine. So the next morning they said, would you like to stay here in the German hospital or go to the American hospital? And I said, well, right now I've only had one guy that speaks English here, so why don't we go to the German hospital? So they brought over what was called a Fox, and that was a wheeled ambulance that was armored. Very impressed with it. So the German medics loaded me up, and they zipped me over to Camp Phoenix. They rolled up to the back of Phoenix's, TMC, not really a hospital, but they had beds, and they had the ability to do treatment there. And there was a whole group of Americans waiting there, and they pulled up, and they took the stretcher out. They set it. They have those stands that the stretcher sets on, hooked the IV bag up. Well, neither one of them spoke any English, so they jabbered something in German to the crowd, And the crowd's like, okay, whatever. They get back in the vehicle. They scoot on out of there. And then everybody's looking at me, and they're smoking a cigarette, and I'm looking at them, and then all of a sudden they put out their cigarettes and they all leave. So it wasn't anybody from the TMC. It was people on a smoke break who had been on sick call. Well, I'm a little pissed over the deal, plus I'm high on morphine, and decided, if you guys don't want to treat me, I'm going to breakfast. So I simply grabbed the IV bag and I hobbled across the compound to the mess hall, and I looked a fright because I had dried blood, my eye sockets, and stitches on my head and everything else. And I get a tray and I hobbled through the line there, and the Kellogg Brown and Root guy looked at me and I said, I'd like some bacon. And he was so terrified, he took the tongs and took every bit of bacon that was in the container, put it on my plate, and gave it to me. I didn't really need that much, but I hobbled over and I sat down. And I sat down at the table, and everybody at the table looked at me, and they picked up and left. Evidently, I looked frightful enough that that wasn't going to do anything for their appetite. This one I found a little disturbing. But when I was done eating, it all of a sudden dawned on me that I couldn't remember my tent number. And so think of this. This camp is a checkerboard of A through whatever and 1 through whatever. So you might be, C-17. But I couldn't remember my tent number, and I got discouraged. And the only thing that I knew was they just changed out the guard towers on the four corners from the old wooden towers to these new metal towers. And I knew that those were on the ground, and there were cots in there for the guards to sleep. So I hobbled over there and set the IV bag on the shelf and went to sleep. Well, in the meantime, there was a guy by the name of Tommy Franks, just happened to be CENTCOM commander, and decided, this major was wounded, first field grade officer to be wounded in that area, and so I'm going to go present the Purple Heart. So he shows up at the German hospital, and he's got his photographer and his aide and all that. The Germans are like, Das wie Dodo, he's not here. So he shows up at Phoenix, and he comes in and goes, I'm ready to, pin this on. And they go, I haven't seen him, don't know nothing about it. So he starts making some calls and lighting people on fire, going, hey, where the hell is Brewer? And they're like, I don't know. Well, no one did know. My soldiers didn't know. None of the hospitals knew. And, of course, the two kids they sent with me didn't speak English, so they didn't know how. They said we delivered him. But then the hospital said they didn't get him. So, in the meantime, I'm sleeping through all this. I have no idea what's going on. I wake up hours later. It's day. It's dark out. And now the morphine's wore off, and I'm hurting everywhere. It hurts to breathe. It hurts to set up. It hurts to move. I'm like, okay, I got to go find my. And now I could clearly think of what my tent number was, but I'm moving so slow, and I'm shuffling like a little old man because I couldn't raise my legs because one I'd been shot through, and so I stumbled across the camp, and I run into one of my company commanders as I'm coming in the tent. He goes, sir, where the hell have you been? And I said, I've been sleeping. He goes, oh, my God, the whole world's looking for you. I said, well, listen, I'm tired. I'm going back to sleep. He goes, oh, no. I got to take you to the hospital. And so he escorted me over, and as soon as I got in, someone made a call, and the MPs came, and they put me in a room, and they stood there and guarded me, and I didn't go anywhere until the general showed up. But, it was kind of a bizarre experience for the treatment beyond getting wounded. But, it was early in the war. They hadn't had to deal with many casualties. It was just lessons learned and the things that happen in war.
And, of course, then about 8 years later, you get hit with an RPG and again, and you recover again. And I want to move forward. So you complete this amazing military career, and then you decide to go into politics. Why?
Well, I didn't really plan on it. When I finished, of course, after the RPG attack, I spent 2 years in the hospital getting rebuilt, going to surgery after surgery, and that was a long, hard process. And what was hard about it is I lived through this, and this was occupational therapy, physical therapy. This was because of traumatic brain injury, you have a speech therapist and you have a neuropsychologist. And so literally your whole day, every day was going from doctor to doctor to doctor. Now, fortunately, Madonna is great, and then they're who worked with me. But I literally 2 years of my life was spent trying to get back to normal. And I was trying to get that so I could redeploy. And at the end of it, the Army does an eval and says, you're too broken. and we're going to retire you. Well, the whole goal you work for just got yanked out from underneath you. And I was in a bad place. I was like, you know what, this is so hard to figure out what to do now, because everything you have done in your life evolves around serving your country and going and doing things in faraway places to represent your country. And now I'm left, kind of crippled up with a cup of coffee in the morning, scratching my head, wondering what to do. Well, fortunately, I was blessed to get a call from a guy in Montana. And he goes, listen, we have a new program we're starting. So through Wounded Warriors, it's to do equine with wounded soldiers, and we'd like you to come in and be a part of this. Well, I grew up on a horse. I mean, that's what our primary means of transportation when I was a kid. And my father had packed hunters into the mountains. So I knew how to do that part of it. A little rusty because it had been a number of years. But I said, that might be good. It's something to do and get me out of this kind of dark place I'm at. And I went to Montana, just outside of Bozeman, and went through the equine training, which was really kind of a walk in the park for me. But there was a lot of wounded soldiers that were there. This was all new to them. And all of a sudden, I realized I was teaching them how to saddle horses and how to care for horses and how to trim hooves. And it felt like a natural fit because I understood where they were in this dark place. And they were trying to go from no life. Matter of fact, a couple of them had already attempted suicide, to a place where they were learning something new. And they were finding out that this world where they didn't feel like they had any value, all of a sudden they did have value. And they were learning something new, and they were enjoying it. And then after the first 5 or 6 days, then we took them into the mountains for a week. And we taught them how to start fires with just sticks, mostly native traditional skills, which just happened to know a few of them. And how to navigate in the daytime without a compass, and how to kind of manage the terrain there, understanding where to go, where not to go on horseback. And so what happened was, all of a sudden I went from being kind of in a dark place to where I kind of enjoyed what I was doing. So they said, well, would you stay here and be an instructor? I said, sure, love to. And really for the next 2 years, during the season that we could ride, was up there doing that. And I saw guys had lost limbs and were trying to understand how to use the replacement limbs. All of a sudden, get this level of confidence that they could ride a horse and they could hold reins with a hook or a replacement hand or whatever it might be, and use a leg that wasn't their leg. And probably the one that won my heart the most was a young man from Massachusetts who had been shot in the head in Iraq, in Fallujah, and had lost part of his brain. And the part of his brain that he'd lost was his short-term memory. So we would teach him how to saddle a horse, and the next day he wouldn't remember, so we'd have to teach him again. And what happened was, on about the third or fourth day, it transitioned to long-term memory, and then he could remember. And so we continued to work with him and kept him over for a second class. And it was through this process that he was able to learn to ride, learn to pack, learn how to do all these things. And he went from someone who literally had sat at home staring at a wall thinking that his life was over, to trying out for the police department in Boston. Now, he could be a police officer because of his injuries, but what he could do, he did a service kind of like a resource officer in the schools, and he would go in and teach and do things, and took him from no value to really someone who was contributing back to his community. And so you were doing something where you felt you were making the world a better place. And I had family come to me and they said, listen, we want you to run for the legislature. And I said, guys, I'm not a politician. I don't know anything about being a politician.
Yeah, as a leader, you were the anti-politician.
Yeah, really,
you were the guy that told us how it was. You were never, now Tom Brewer was known as the anti-politician of officers, the one who always put the team first. So that's why I'm so curious. So the family asks you to do it and you say, I'm not a politician. So how do they twist your arm?
Well, what they did is they talked about all of the things that needed to be done that were being neglected. And the guy who had the job had promised to do all these things and hadn't done them. He was up for re-election, and he was going to win by default because no one was running against him. And they said, just try. Throw your name in. And I said, I don't like taking a butt whipping here. He's a millionaire. I have no money. And they said, please, for us, just try. I said, all right, I'll do it. So I threw my name in the hat on the last hour of the last day that you could register to run. Well, this is another mistake because you want all the time you can to run. More time is to your advantage. You get to meet people and go places. Well, to my absolute shock, because I went to a few sale barns and a few events, but I had 2 months between registering and the primary. In the primary, I beat him over 1,000 votes and didn't do anything, didn't spend any money, just drove around, visited some people. So he was so disliked and distrusted because he didn't do what he said he was going to do that he opened a path for me that I didn't earn necessarily. All they thought of is, we've got someone who hasn't done what he said he would do, and we have someone who's spent a lifetime doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And that's a pretty good slogan. Well, unfortunately, what that did is unleash the dogs of hell upon me in that he was able to generate hundreds of thousands of dollars to run against me. Well, I didn't have any money to run against him. And some of the wounded veterans that had worked with me in the program came to me and said, let's ride across the district and we'll visit these towns and meet these people. And we don't have to, we just need hay and hot dogs. And I said, really? You guys would give up? Because we did the math. There's about 580 miles around the district because I got the biggest district in the state and one of the biggest in the nation. And they go, yeah. Well, I'll bring my pickup and my horse trailer. And one of them said, well, I have the mules and I have the horses. And I had a couple of my nephews that chimed in and Tony Baker, who's now my chief of staff. And so all these people that I had known from the Guard and from the Wounded Warrior program or the equine program, they all come together. And we all met in Ainsworth, Nebraska on Labor Day weekend, which was the Brown County Fair, and met folks at the fair. And we started to ride. And so you'd have a team that would jump forward, and they would set up the next location, have hay for the horses, tents for the guys, food ready, and we just leapfrog from town to town. And we would travel about 25 to 30 miles a day, about the normal distance you travel with horses and the pace they hold. But the ironic part about it is they built towns about that far apart back when they built towns because that's about how far they could go without wood or coal or water for the old rail system. So if you run up there and you look from Ainsworth to Johnstown to Valentine to Crookston, Kilgore, Cody, those old towns are all at that distance. So we just simply started leapfrogging across Nebraska and the district, the 43rd district. And you would come to these towns, and the American Legion auxiliary little women would come out, and they would have this potluck dinner, and people would come to the park. And they came because no one ever comes to these little towns in the middle of nowhere. So they want to meet you. And they'd evaluate how well you were taking care of your animals, because that was probably how well you were going to treat people and how you treated your horses and your mules. And we just simply went from town to town. In Merriman, Nebraska, a town of 120 people, 200 and some people showed up. And what happened was, all of a sudden I went from down 10 points in the polls to up 10 points in the polls, because once you looked them in the eye and they were sold that you were the right guy, you could get all the mailers you want. You could have all the commercials you want, and you couldn't win someone's vote. And it turned out to be a brilliant move, which, again, don't give me credit. It was some of the veterans who believed in me and spent a month and a half either riding a mule, a horse, or driving across the district helping me to win. Well, now it was a situation where there was nothing he could do. And I think he did end up spending almost $500,000 to a few thousand that I spent. But he couldn't change the polls because once you win the hearts and minds, you pretty much have the hearts and minds. The odd problem was I was a dog that caught the car, and I got to figure out what to do with it. And so then I had this passion to help veterans and help the ranchers and the farmers and the people of the district that needed help that were neglected for 4 years. Because what was obvious is if you go to a job as a state senator and you do nothing, you take that part of Nebraska and you make them invisible, and they have nothing. And so now I felt very obligated. And there were Native issues too. Remember that we were the ones, as soon as I hit the ground there, that took on White Clay. And for those that don't understand, White Clay was a small town, actually of 11 people. It was on the Nebraska-South Dakota border, and it sold about 4.5 million cans of beer a year to the Native American population just north of there, about 1 mile, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, where I grew up. And they literally poisoned this reservation. We had 23 kids in the neonatal with infant alcohol fetal syndrome. And so I took it on that we had to close these liquor stores. There was a lot of reasons for that. When I worked counter-drug, we knew that there was issues of human trafficking, of prostitution, of illegal alcohol sales, murder. I mean, there was a lot of things that were happening up there were just horrible. But Nebraska didn't really want to deal with it. South Dakota didn't want to deal with it. The tribe couldn't deal with it. So this was this no man's land of evil. And within a few months of getting the job, I was able to convince, in the Liquor Commission, they made the decision too, because they were failing to do what they were supposed to do to keep their liquor license. We closed them. We destroyed some of the houses that were like flop houses. We built a new senior home there. We built, there's two now, there's 2 Dollar General stores. There's a maker space. Went from this town of people laying all over and death to now it's this thriving little town that has businesses and they interact with the reservation. And there's one child, when I was up just a few weeks ago, one child in the hospital with infant alcohol fetal syndrome. So, you take on challenges, whether it be veterans or Native American or ranchers, and you figure out, because the ranchers said, they're trying to build these wind towers in the sandhills. We want to protect the Ogallala Aquifer. We want to protect the beauty of the sandhills. We don't want people to see this mass of wind towers. We want to keep what our fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers who settled this country learned to love and protect. And so that became one of my missions in life. And I shared with you how last week we had a committee hearing on small modular nukes. And people get scared about the word nukes, but remember that we've had these nukes on our submarines, on our ships, for 40 years and never had a problem. And that's run by young men and women in their late teens or 20s. So the idea that we could have a small modular nuke the size of a couple of connexes that could light all of northwest Nebraska or southeast Nebraska and not have, one of these units can account for hundreds and hundreds of wind towers. And guess what? They work 24/7. They don't need no wind. So there's all kinds of issues. But what you learn when you become a senator is that you have so much responsibility to fix things, and you can either work long hours and do it or just let folks down. And I never wanted, and I was blessed to have a great staff. I have a great staff. But it does mean a lot of hours. And I worry that when I'm done, I need to transition the next guy with all of this information, because the guy I ran against was so angry about getting beat that he emptied the office, took everything out of it, cleared all the files, deleted everything off the computers, and gave me nothing because he wanted me to fail. Well, all that does is piss me off and I work harder. But to my point, if I could hand over all of the history, all of the information on how to deal with all these issues to the next guy, then that's success. That's doing the right thing for the people you represent. And I went from this anti-politician to, I was a politician, but I wasn't a politician in the sense that I told them things and then did something else. I made it my purpose in life to be sure that if I told them I was going to do something, whether it be stop wind towers or clean up White Clay, or make sure that veterans' retirement pay was protected and de-taxed, that's what I did. Because that's all you're going to have left when the dust settles. And sometimes I see these guys who become colonels or generals in the Guard on active duty, and when they're done, they cut the ties, they walk away, they go somewhere and do something, but that association with the men who helped them, protected them, and made their careers possible are gone, and they don't do anything to help them. And I always felt that if you're helping me be successful and you're there when I need you, whether it be on a shooting team or whether it be Katrina or wherever it might be, I have an obligation to help you in every way I can. Now, if that means free parking permits so you can go to state parks, if that means hunting licenses, if that means detaxing your retirements, there's all these things, homestead exemption for veterans, all these things we're working. That makes their lives better beyond retirement. And that's my way of saying thank you. Thank you for being there when I needed you. But that's what we need more of in the Nebraska legislature are veterans who are willing to really do some hard work and remember the veterans so that they don't walk away and give nothing back. And that's what has always troubled me is if you are blessed enough to be able to have a military career and move up into whatever rank as an NCO, as an officer, and then to sever that, walk away from everyone and never give anything back, you've done an injustice.
And I think at that point, too, you've lost the most important thing, which is that camaraderie and that understanding of all the lessons. And, your predecessor did not give you the courtesy of the right seat, left seat ride. And, as we look at our legacies and where the ultimate right seat, left seat ride resides is with our children and our family. And like you, my father was I came from a military family. Both of my brothers, one in the Air Force, the other one Navy, but we all serve. And now your children serve. And I know there's some great pride that you have in bringing the next generation along. And tell us just a little bit about your family. And of course, the story about the Blood Wings. And for those of you that are listening, don't know about Airborne School and Blood Wings, back when I went through, it was still a thing. You would, when you'd finish jump school after 3 weeks, at the ceremony, you would get a airborne qualified soldier would give you your wings and they would pound it into your chest with they would take the backs off. And so these two bars would go straight in your chest and they'd pound it into your chest and there'd be a little bit of blood and they pulled it out. And that was part of the ritual. Well, Army didn't like that so much. People complained, thought it might be hazing. And so that went away, but it doesn't go away for some heroes. So let's hear about your family's involvement in the military and of course the Blood Wing story.
Well, I think I'd have to start by just sharing a little about my father. So my father is as rough as a human could be. Some compare him to Rooster Cogburn for a number of reasons. He only has one eye, wears a patch. He was Ranger Class 2. So he's old school Ranger.
That means the second class to earn a Ranger tab was your father.
That's correct. And he went to Korea. Back then, the Rangers were put into companies. They were used for long-range reconnaissance, kind of like the LRS. And he was assigned to the 2nd Infantry Division, ironically, the Indian Head Division. And he was wounded twice, once by a mortar round that landed in the foxhole he was in. The second time was a jump into Seoul as they were retaking Seoul. And he was bayoneted in the chest as he was trying to get up from doing a PLF, a parachute landing fall, and literally was stuck to the frozen ground with a Chinese bayonet, and was able to deal with the guy that stabbed him. The problem was he couldn't get up from the ground because he was literally like a tent peg stuck to the ground there and had to wait for one of his buddies to come and unstick him. Well, the other thing was they were isolated and they had jumped behind the enemy, so there wasn't any way to evac him. So he basically just had to kind of suck it up and get through it. But he did and went to Tripler, and then when he was done, he was sent back to the United States. They defused the Rangers into different units. He was diffused into the 82nd Airborne. And ironically, he was only there for a few months, and they sent him to Nevada for what was called Operation Upshot Knothole. And Upshot Knothole was where they had the 82nd troopers dig foxholes and get down in them, and then they detonated a nuclear device relatively close to them. And it was to see if soldiers would break and run under a nuclear attack. And I got a kick out of my dad. He said, when the flash happened, he said, you were sitting in this hot foxhole as low as you could get. and you could look and see the bones in your hand from this flash, is how bright it was there. And he said the idea of getting up and running was nowhere in his mindset whatsoever. He wanted to dig deeper in that hole, but he had an interesting military career, but he wanted to come back. At heart, he was a cowboy at heart. So he came back and he cowboyed. He guided hunters. When I was small, we were dehorning some yearlings, and the horn was about the size of your thumb, and the yearling threw the horn as he was trying to dehorn it and run the horn into his eye, and that's how he lost his eye. But he wears a patch. He is very similar to Rooster Cogman, very very grumpy, but also he was, sometimes having someone harsh who's mentoring you is good, because life is hard. And if you grow up soft, you live soft. And there wasn't a lot of soft when it come to my old man. He, you didn't get anything extra to eat or any extra sleep, because there was plenty of work to do. But that paid off later in life. But he was in his late 80s when my daughter Kaylee graduated from airborne school, and I came to him and I said, "Dad, would you like to go?" Because that's a long flight, all the way down to Columbus. And he said, "Yeah, I could do it." So we went down, and he did well. We're getting him off the plane, getting in the rental car, and we're driving on to Fort Benning, and he sees the jump towers, and he looks around, and took him up by Harmony Church, because that's, of course, where he graduated back then. And he goes, "I cannot believe how much this place has changed." I said, "Dad, when was the last time you were here?" And he said, "Well, 1950. I said, "Well, things will change in 70 years." So got kind of a kick out of how much he changed. The next day was her last jump. We went out on the Friar Drop Zone, and I remember going over to one of the black hats and saying, "Listen, my father's here. He hasn't been back since 1950, and he would like to go out on the drop zone to watch my daughter jump." I said, "Is it all right if I go out?" And, of course, I was in uniform then, and he says, "Colonel, you can do whatever you want." So I took him out, and what was amazing was he's critiquing these kids coming down. He's yelling at them to get their feet and knees together. And so, here's this old paratrooper from long, long ago, and the fundamentals were so ingrained into him that so the commander of the airborne school there saw him and met him, and he goes, "Listen, I would love to have your father say a few words to the troopers tomorrow." I said, "Oof, I don't know. He's a little rough around the edges." He said, "Please." I said, "All right." So the next day they introduced him, and he was by far the oldest paratrooper there. And he got up and he said, "Listen, I want you guys to know that I think you're all a bunch of whips." And of course I'm going, "Oh, geez." I kind of warned the guy. He goes, "I've been here 3 days, and I haven't seen a single one of you do a push-up." And he says, "When I was here, we jumped into Friar Drop Zone, and we ran back to the airfield." He says, "I haven't seen you guys run anywhere. You ride buses." He said, "If you're going to be a paratrooper, you need to get hard." And, and of course, this poor old lieutenant colonel, he's wilting. He's figuring his career's over. And that was, well, no, he had one other comment. He said, and also he says, "I've been listening to you guys." And he said, "Every one of you guys want to talk dirty. Your language is horrible." He said, "So when you're up in that C-130, just remember that's about as close to heaven as you're ever going to get." So at that point, we got the hook and pulled him off the stage, and they had the airborne wings, and they said that my daughter Kaylee would be the first to get the wings because he'd be presenting them. And he went up there, and as he's walking up, they make the formal announcement from the President of the United States, then Barack Obama, that the procedure of blood wings is no longer authorized in the United States Army. And my father, being the hard-headed guy he is, walked up there, pinned the wings on, and gave her blood wings in front of everybody. Now, everybody on stage passed out, and all the troopers cheered and screamed. But I thought it was probably a good way for this lieutenant colonel to finally end the day, because if he hadn't ended his career, he sure did there.
And so you also have sons and nephews as well, and I know we have some photos. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I have 3 nephews who were in Afghanistan with me. They all are infantry, and all NCOs. They all are just good solid soldiers you'd be proud of. My son, Travis, he's air defense artillery. His problem was he scored too high on the ASVAB, so they gave him a job that required, a higher level intelligence, I guess. He programs computers and figures out how to keep the enemy jets from getting too close. But my one nephew, Steve, is the sergeant major for the Airborne Infantry Battalion here in Nebraska. And I had a chance to see him at my uncle's funeral last week. Got a picture of him and myself and my father together, the 3rd Rangers. And we have my nephew's son, who is in Ranger School now. So we will soon have 4 generations of Rangers together. And I'm hoping to be able to take Dad down to his Ranger graduation to pin his tab on.
Wow. Amazing. Now, I want to get into some of the other humanitarian leadership things that you've been involved in. I remember, it was probably a couple years ago. I got a call or text from you saying, "Hey, you want to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro?" And I said, "Tom, I thought you had cancer." And he's like, "Hey, it's in remission. We're good. I'm going to go do this. Are you going to go do this with me?" Unfortunately, I had a federal jury trial set the same week, and so I couldn't continue it. I couldn't move it. It was an important case for me, and we won. But it was I regret not being able to go. But I know that. Tell us a little bit about that, because it seems to me people. They come, they get to a point in their life where they get comfortable and they stop doing things. And for you, it was after the military, after you recovered 2 years in recovery from the RPG attack, you're in politics. Then the next thing you know, you're taking these politicians to Mount Kilimanjaro. And now you've been back to Ukraine 5 times. And so I'd just like to hear, how do you keep that will to lead going, especially with all you have going on in your life?
Well, I don't know if I should take a lot of credit there, because actually originally it was just me that was going to climb Kilimanjaro. And then I got thinking, that's kind of a lonely job. Maybe I ought to see if I can't find a few folks to go with me, just in case, you have a problem. You hate to be alone in a foreign country and all that. So that's why I got a hold of you, and I talked to Senator Wayne. And Justin's like, I think I would like to do that. Well, then I sat beside Senator Hansen, and Ben Hansen, of course, he's younger, he's in good shape, and he's a chiropractor. And I thought, it might be kind of handy to have a chiropractor on a mountain. And then, of course, Anna Wishart heard about it. And, of course, Anna, she's like this little Energizer bunny, so she's all over it. And then the latecomer was Dave Merman. And I didn't think Dave, he's pretty long in the tooth, and I didn't know if he was up for it. So he asked me, how would I know if I could do it or not? And I said, well, Dave, here's the deal. You're going to have to go out. And if you can road march with a ruck on for 16 miles in a day, you're good to go. Well, that was way more than you had to do any one day on Kilimanjaro. But I thought he'd go out and do about 8 miles and then, wear out. Then he'd say, I was saying for me, well, he went out and did it. So I said, all right, I got to make sure you guys are ready. So I took him up to Bomber Mountain in Wyoming. We climbed Bomber Mountain, and hang it if they didn't make it. In fact, there were a couple of them looking better than I was. So we had come up with the 5 senators, and then we had about another. We had 5 from Nebraska. I had a retired colonel from. He was from Nebraska, from Falls City, but he lives in Mississippi now. He went with us, and we took a photographer too, because I wanted some documentation of this, because that might be kind of a cool thing to just be, because you can take iPhone stuff, but in the end, if you have a professional photographer, you get really quality stuff you can have some memories of. And he did video too. As a matter of fact, we're putting together a package and hoping that NET Nebraska might decide they want to have this. But it was harder than I thought. First day, you start in a tropical rainforest, and the first day, and I could tell I had not drank enough water. I was in trouble, so I actually stayed up part of the night slamming water, because I think ranger school and places kind of let you understand your body and know when you're in trouble. And so the next day I kind of regrouped. Well, on the second day we lost Colonel Joy, the retired colonel from Mississippi. And so it was obvious that not everybody's going to make it to the top of Kilimanjaro. But I really wanted to. And I knew that short of having a broken leg, and even if I had a broken leg, I might stumble on the stub if I had to, but I wanted to get up Kilimanjaro. It was a personal thing now. And as time went on and we got higher, I did better. in the thinner air than I did down below. And lo and behold, when I got to the top of Kilimanjaro, you have these things in life where you stop just for a moment and you look around and you realize that you'll never, ever be in this place again, that this will be a once-in-a-lifetime thing. And you want to breathe it in. You want to hold it forever, but it isn't long. And of course, you can only stay at 20,000 feet about so long, and you're not going to do well anyway. But I never regretted it. I was in pain at times because I had both ankles fused from bad parachute jumps. But when I was done and looked back, no regrets. It was a great trip. It was good people. It was a good time. And I think, at the point you quit having bucket list stuff, that's when life really ends. And you're just treading time. And I don't ever want to be treading time. Well, I want to be churning and burning till the very end.
Well, and after that, you did. And let's talk a little about Ukraine, because you grew up presumably a Cold War soldier. That's how I learned back before Bosnia. I was in Bosnia in '99, but before the train up was, we're going to fight the Russians. And so we learned all about their doctrine and their tactics. And then Ukraine blows up, and you're on the first thing smoking over there. You were over there before it even happened. So tell us a little about your humanitarian missions over there.
Well, actually, they weren't humanitarian missions. What happened was, when in 2010, we did not have enough helicopters to do the counter-narcotics mission. So we purchased 22 helicopters from the Ukrainians. Well, it just so happened that I could read and write Russian, and I went to Russia in college and studied Eastern European history. So I went over during the Cold War after I'd been enlisted, and my understanding of a lot of things about Russian history and the Ukraine came from that time. So I had a good understanding of things way before I ever went over to pick up these helicopters. So we did commercial air into Kiev. We inspected the helicopters, then we flew them down and through the Hindu Kush and back to Kabul. And it was several shuttle trips that I did to get those helicopters moved down there. And the people of the Ukraine were so welcoming and so warm, and I just kind of fell in love with the place. So then when February of 2022 rolled around and I saw what the Russians did, it really affected me, because what we, as you said, what we thought would happen did happen to them. And the very vehicles that we studied how to defeat were the ones they were using. And I thought, you know what, I want to go see myself. I want to be able to know that I contributed somehow to helping them. My problem was I didn't speak Ukrainian, didn't know anybody in the Ukraine personally. So I was blessed to have a Nebraskan, a kid from the town of Elmwood, who was over there. And he was at he was at a church camp in February of 2022 when the war started. He was helping, and at 4:30 in the morning, the bombs started raining in very close to where he was at. He was near an airfield. And he started a mission to shuttle women and children out of the Ukraine that lasted for months. Well, I sent him an email, and I said, listen, I'm looking at coming to the Ukraine. Can you help me? And he goes, yeah. Meet me in Lviv. So we set a time and a place. We met, and he found a young man who was part of the church, support team, who spoke wonderful English. He became my interpreter, a kid by the name of Bogdan. And his father was a mechanic, and he found a vehicle for us. And so they met me in the town of Lviv, which is just over the Polish border, and we started driving around the Ukraine. Well, what I didn't understand is that the Ukraine is kind of like small-town America. He started making calls. And the next thing I know, we're meeting with the Minister of Intelligence, who was a guy nobody gets to see because he's very secretive. He's planning a lot of these crazy ops they're doing to defeat the Russians. But he wanted to meet me. And then all of a sudden, I've got all the mayors wanting to meet me. Well, what it is they're so hungry to meet an American because we've made this decree that no American soldiers will set foot in the Ukraine. And we followed that to the degree that we don't even let Marines in our embassy there. And we really don't have an embassy that's active. most of it's being done out of Warsaw, Poland. So they just want to meet an American. And they want to meet you to say thank you. Thank you for saving us. Well, you know as well as I do that it didn't matter whether we were in Afghanistan or Iraq. You could not walk the streets there and have little old ladies come up to you and hug you and say thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. And it just overwhelmed me with pride in America, but also with a passion to want to continue to help them. So when I met with this minister of intelligence, he goes, listen, we need things, and I don't know how to get the word to America, to the people who make these decisions. I said, well, here's an idea. Tell me. Let me tell those in Washington, D.C. what you need. I'll be your conduit. He goes, all right. And so he started making a list of things like the M777 cannon and HIMARS. And so we went down this list of things they needed. Includes the M1 tank. Includes ATACMS. So gradually those things have come to them. I'm concerned that we could have done it quicker. I think there are a lot of Ukrainian lives that are lost because we didn't move faster. And if we're going to give them to them, let's give them to them. Let's let them win the war. Let's just be done with it. But we've kind of slow rolled them, but we've given them to them. That's the main thing. And so my trips over each one was a little different in who I was trying to help. Now, I also did humanitarian help in that I brought e-Bibles over. So an e-Bible is essentially an electronic Bible, but it's small. It's the size of your thumb with 2 earbuds. And the reason I brought it over is the mayor of Lviv took me to a huge military hospital. And so this huge military hospital was full of all these guys who had been wounded, and they didn't have any replacement limbs for them. And they weren't going to get any. And so they were trapped in a place where, life was pretty dark for them. And I thought, you know what? If you could just give them something to help them maybe get a better grasp on life and their situation, and you can't bring Bibles over. For one, it'd have to be in Ukrainian, and two, it would be thousands of pounds. And, when you travel, you have to travel light. But these e-Bibles, I took 2,500 of them over in 2 suitcases. And so I would go around and share those with them, and they were in Ukrainian, and they lifted their spirits. I bought every one there was in America that you could buy of these Ukrainian e-Bibles. And it was probably one of the better things I'd done in as far as helping people. I also went over and we delivered blowout kits, medical kits to the soldiers. A lot of the soldiers on the front line didn't have them. And that was a very popular thing. But what we did there is we bought them in Poland and brought them over because, again, weight and size became an issue. And so each trip I tried to do something different. It wasn't just talking with the intelligence or military folks what they need, but also direct to individuals on how to help them. And just like any calling in life, when you make life better for folks, that feeling you can't replace. That just makes you feel like the world is right, that you've done what you should do. So I did that, and the most recent trip was this past June. So we ended session. The last day of session, I was on a plane to the Ukraine. And this one, now they know me. And so when I hit the ground, I have already scheduled appointments with the Deputy Minister of Defense, the Minister of Intelligence, the Minister of Agriculture, because they see that when this war is over, they're going to need a lot of things like grain bins. They're going to need corn seed. They're going to need tractors. They're going to need combines. They're going to all these things. And they looked at a map and said, this Nebraska place has potential to make our life after this war is over much better because we live on agriculture. Russia lives on oil. Ukraine is Iowa, the size of Texas. And so now they're coming to me, want to meet with me. I feel bad. I'm not State Department. I'm nobody official in the military. But again, they want to talk to an American. They want to say, hey, we need help now, and we're going to need help down the road, and we have no one to talk to but you. So I have tried to relay information. I've even talked to the governor, and the governor is of the same opinion, that as soon as this war is over, let's figure out how to help Nebraska help the Ukraine. And we had an event a week ago Friday in Lincoln, and hundreds of Ukrainians, and we had I think almost 24 senators there. So what we're trying to do is build this relationship so that when the war is over, we can help them, because Ukraine is never going to be in Afghanistan or Iraq. We're always going to be loved there and wanted, and there's a value added that we would never have in an Afghanistan, because in many ways they're so similar to us.
Well, and you've already handled this before, and the ranches and the farms in western Nebraska, and you understand what needs to happen and logistically how the support that they need, and so you become a very valuable team member to them. Now, I also know that while you're over there, you put yourself in harm's way again, and just by being over there. And I think you were even on the news over there, if I recall. And I think I even texted you back and said, Todd, you have a death wish? These people are going to see you, and they know who you are, and you're helping, and the Russians don't like that. But here you are, and putting yourself in harm's way, and I know there's some pretty dangerous situations over there. But let me ask you this. Bullets didn't stop you. RPG didn't stop you. Cancer didn't stop you. Not even the Russians can stop you. So what stops Tom Brewer? Where do you stop, Tom?
Well, probably Father Time is going to be the one that gets me in the end. But I guess the thing that I'm a little lost with now is that on or about the 20th day of April of 2024, I'll finish my time as a senator. And I'll have to figure out what to do with life. I'd like to think that I would go fly fishing and relax, because that's what people do when they retire. But I think I would fish for a few days and then kind of be lost, because I think the good Lord puts you on this planet for a set amount of time, and only He knows what that time is. And it's your obligation to do those things that help others and make this world a better place for everyone to live in. And you're cheating them and yourself if you're not doing those very things. And I don't know what that future is for me. It's one of those things you pray about, and you think that when the time comes, you'll figure it out. I think sometimes we force things and don't let what is to happen. And so I'm not going to get too worried about it. I'm going to work hard to have a good session this year. I got some other veterans things that need to be done. I got a school security bill I want to get through. I want to do some things that need done with homestead exemption for veterans. So we will go 100 mile an hour until we're done with the session, and then maybe take a few days to fly fish, but something will work out.
Well, thank you so much for coming on here. You exemplify the warrior in uniform and the warrior outside the uniform, and you've given so much back to the community. And like me, I think you would agree that we receive so much when we serve that it makes no sense not to give back, and the more we give, the more we get. But I would ask you to leave us with your after-action review. What are 3 things that you did that went really well that you've learned from your military career? And what are 3 things that you remember, the 3 up, the 3 down, 3 that went well, 3 that didn't happen? I'd love to sit here and say what was the mission, what actually happened, but you've been through hundreds of missions. But if you had to narrow it down, to give advice to veterans looking to get to that next level, whether it's they're just getting out of the military or they've been out of the military and they want to continue on that path of success, what are the 3 top things that Tom Brewer has learned throughout his career as a military officer and as a senator and as a humanitarian?
Well, on the minus side, I think there were times that I didn't listen to my NCOs as well as I should have. And whether you replace the NCO with staff, the end effect is the same. There were times that things could have been done so much more efficiently had I just listened. But sometimes you can be very stubborn, especially as a young lieutenant or captain. That would be one of them. The other one, I think, would be that there were a few things that I was hesitant to do because I was worried that it might be too hard. And looking back on it now, I wish I would have tested everything to the limit. And to a degree, I did pretty good. Ranger school is not a walk in the park. That's a test. And And I feared failing there because I knew of the disappointment my father would have. And that, that's hard. You don't want that to be looming over you. But you also don't want to be that person who says, well, I could have done Ranger School. I just never had a chance. Well, if you shape the fight, you can have a chance. And so, don't be afraid of taking risks, because in the end, the regret will be that you didn't do it, not that you did it and failed. And probably the last one is that, we do these deployments all over the world, and the ones who really suffer are your families, because you become very focused in theater and making sure that the troops have everything they need and that you're successful in that mission. And sometimes you forget back home that, you have a family that's trying to struggle to get by every day. And I always worried that my kids would turn into juvenile delinquents because I wasn't there. So it's kind of refreshing. My son teaches math in high school and was in the Guard, and my daughter is a captain and loving her service and what she's doing, and they're raising families. And all my fears of having juvenile delinquent kids didn't work out that way, but it was because they did a lot on their own. I wasn't there. I missed pretty much 3 years of my daughter's high school and 3 years of my son's high school just because of all deployments with Afghanistan. So the family be the other thing that sometimes you neglect, and I wish I probably would have worked harder to get back, see them do more. On the upside, wow, 3's hard, because you think about all of those who, if it wasn't for them, you would have very limited success in life. And I give that again to the NCOs that coached and mentored me over the years, whether it was in Katrina. When they pull you aside and they say, hey, sir, I don't know if this is a good idea. And then you stop and think about it for a second, like, you're probably right. It's probably a very good idea. So to all of those, all those NCOs that over the years made life successful because they not only helped you get through it, but they also were the ones that made sure you didn't do things that were going to probably end your career. I would say the other one is you look back at all of those opportunities you had in life, and a lot of those meant doing a lot of really hard work and taking risks. It would be easy to go through a military career and not do anything too hard and not take any risks and still become a major, lieutenant colonel. Heck, I think there's a lot of generals that probably got to be general that way. But when you're finished with your time in uniform and you don't have both officers and NCOs, but especially NCOs, that say, I enjoyed serving with that man. He took care of me. He watched out for us. Then you failed, because I don't know how many officers that I could think of now that no one has a thing to say, good or bad. They were invisible through their careers because they wanted to be invisible. They wanted to get rank without the challenges and responsibilities and burdens that come with that. And that's all you're going to have when the dust settles, are those that you worked with who say, you know what, he did the right thing. He did the hard thing. And probably the last thing is that through all of this, you gotta go back to your faith, because whether you're jumping out of an airplane or you're walking into tracers, you have to have a strong belief that when this is all over, you're going to go and you're going to stand at the pearly gates and you're going to be judged. And Some people just don't want to take the time to really know the Lord and have a good heart that when this life is over, they know that that's where they're going to go. And I think if you have that, you don't fear death. You simply live life to the fullest because you know that when your time is done, your time is done. And wherever you are, that's where you're going to be.
Well, thank you so much. Great after-action review. Thank you, Colonel Brewer, Senator Brewer, a hero to many, but more importantly, someone who doesn't stop being a hero and who continues to give and give and give and build on success so that we can learn what the next step will be for us. I know a lot of veterans who have cherished your leadership and have grown because of it. So thank you for being on the podcast today, but most importantly, thank you for what you do for our men and women in uniform, and thank you for what you do for our communities.
Thank you for joining us today on Veteran Led, where we pursue our mission of promoting veteran leadership in business, strengthening the veteran community, and getting veterans all of the benefits that they earned. If you know a leader who should be on the Veteran Led podcast, report to our online community by searching @Veteran Led on your favorite social channels and posting in the comments. We want to hear how your military challenges prepared you to lead your industry or community, and we will let the world know. And of course, hit subscribe and join me next time on Veteran Led.